Image tells a spatial distribution of rainfall during this period, that is a 4 week period. It's largely month of June and also first week of July till 6th of July. This is the image between 9th of June to 6th of July. Okay. This is an extended forecast which is worked out based on the numerical models, giving a projection of likely weather conditions and the rainfall amounts quantitatively over different parts of the country. And as we see, it's a little alarming as far as the western, central parts, even northern parts are concerned, extending to even cover some eastern parts also in this. Rainfall are likely to be well below the norm.
Hello and welcome to Business Today Television. I'm Siddharth Zirabi and you're watching Easynomics. You just heard private weather forecasting agency Skymet weather predict a bleak monsoon for India until at least the 6th of July. Skymet says that central and western parts of India are set to face an inadequate rainfall early in this season. This bleak prediction for the next 4 weeks has raised concerns for our farm sector, given that this is also the time, a very crucial time, when the land is prepared and sowing happens, the preparatory steps. And joining me now to discuss the implications of what could be El Nino consequence for Indian agriculture and the broader economy are Saugata Bhattacharya, Chief Economist at Axis Bank, and Siraj Hussain, former Secretary handling the Department of Agriculture in the Government of India, a senior IS officer who has also tracked the Indian economy. Both of us joining us now live on the show. Thank you very much for joining us. The crux of the Skymet prediction, and I must tell our viewers, this is one such prediction. There is, of course, the government IMD, and we will also wait for their fine print on what they have to say about the southwest monsoon. But two things have happened so far. Whatever monsoon activity that we have seen, Mr. Hussain, and I'm starting this discussion with you, it's been delayed by 1 week. Kerala usual date is the 1st of June. It started on the 8th of June. And the extended range prediction system, ERPS, of Skymet is predicting a dismal outlook. What's your own sense, given your vast experience of tracking the monsoon showers?
You see, from the very beginning, it was clear that this year El Nino effect is going to have an impact on the monsoon rainfall in India. And the first forecast of both IMD and Skymet reflected that. Then the IMD's second forecast came, which sort of projected a better monsoon, some kind of normal monsoon, which was a little surprising. So I wrote an article for Deccan Herald in which I explained the IMD's forecast, because I thought that despite all the experience and knowledge gained by IMD, the monsoon science is still not perfect. And therefore, sometimes the predictions can go wrong. In case of short-term predictions, like the one which has been issued by Skymet today, we can believe that it is going to be more reliable. So I think for the next few days, we should prepare for shortfall in rains. However, for the longer term, my own sense is that despite the IMD's forecast, we should prepare for shortfall in rains due to the impact of El Nino.
Okay, that's a very important nuance that Mr. Siraj Hussain has offered us viewers. He's making 2 points. One, the fact that the IMD gave a second forecast, which was kind of different from the earlier one, but you know, it's science after all. But the more important thing, Shogoto, and I'm coming to you, is the distinction that Mr. Hussain sort of drives into our discussion, which is be prepared for a short-term shortfall, but in the long term things may well change. Is that how you also read his comment?
Yes, I agree. I mean, Mr. Hussain has enormous expertise on this. So I completely agree that the first thing, if assuming that this climate forecast for the next month is correct, that rainfall there is a shortfall in rains and a bad spatial distribution, which is the most important part. Bad spatial distribution with a large
the central India, West India, North India. These are the main crop growing, the kharif crop growing areas. So one thing, the government has already advised farmers to delay sowing. So that's one thing. So if rains begin to pick up, it will still mitigate the impact over the kharif sowing season. It will not be a complete disaster if the rains set in. But there are too many imponderables at this point in time. The good thing in all of this is that with rains, there is definitely likely, with the shortfall and a bad distribution of rains, there's going to be an impact on food grain output. The good thing, which is, I mean, in a bad scenario, the good thing will be that Indian agriculture has now diversified significantly out of food grain, I mean, into animal husbandry, into horticulture, other products, etc., millets, bajra, which are much more resistant which are much less vulnerable to bad rains. So that's one. Reservoir levels are still relatively high compared to the average. In the rural area, of course, I mean, low food grain output will have an impact on agricultural incomes. But in the rural area, in particular, there's been a significant divergence once again, a dispersion into non-agricultural rural activities. So all of these will serve to mitigate the impact of bad rains if it actually happens. But I completely agree with both of you that the government needs to start preparing, and I'm sure they're already having prepared contingency plans for bad rains, but that needs to be put in place step by step as the days go by.
Okay, before we sort of get into the nitty-gritty of the likely impact and what should be the government's response, viewers, just to sort of play out for you some graphics about the El Nino years, as we are calling them, since 1951. The data that's available with us shows that there have been 15 El Nino episode, and I'll request my producers to hold that graphic on the screen. If you see from 51, of course, the most recent one being 2015. There's another bit of data which says that every 4-5 years El Nino phenomenon occurs. Now, this is not very precise in some ways, but coming to you, Mr. Hussain, if you could kind of explain to our viewers the significance of this phenomenon and how it disturbs the southwest monsoon.
Actually, El Nino basically is a result of high temperature in the Pacific Ocean, due to which from Australia to South Africa, the monsoon patterns are affected. And incidentally, India is one of the few countries in the world which issues a long-term forecast of monsoon. As I said earlier, this science is still developing and IMD has a lot of expertise, but even then, I found when I was Secretary of Agriculture in 2015, it was an El Nino year. Both IMD and Skymet had given forecast and it did not come true, and we had a terrible year. So drought is a very bad phenomenon which affects a lot of activities, not only agriculture, but also livelihood, schooling. It results in migration from rural areas to urban areas. There is shortage of fodder. So there is an impact on so many things. The reality is that no one knows what will be the distribution of rainfall. And what is a good news is that now more than 50% of country's area is irrigated. And one assumes that in the irrigated areas, it would be possible for the farmers to take a crop which is not too dependent on rainfall water. Now, having said this, I am sure the government is already preparing contingency plans for various districts. I hope that they would have taken the IMD's forecast of normal monsoon with a pinch of salt, and they would already be preparing contingency plans for supply of seeds in case the first germination fails, supply of drinking water, to make fodder available for cattle, and so on. It requires a lot of preparation, but I think the government has the expertise and the experience of dealing with even a serious drought.
One quick follow-up, since you spoke about 2015 and you were Agriculture Secretary, how bad was it this year? and what could happen. Again, I know that this is a bit speculative, and I'm glad that both of you are offering a sense of reassurance that it is still early days to sort of ring the fire bell. But given 2015 and 2023, what's your own sense about the likely impact?
I do not think it will be as bad as 2015. And the reason is that now we have a lot more experience. And last year was a good example. Both UP and Bihar saw shortfall in rains. And I was proven wrong. I was expecting very adverse impact on rice production in these two states and also in other states of India. But somehow the rice procurement and the rice even production, according to government estimates, is not lower than a normal year. So I think there is a lot of expertise now with the state governments, with the central government, and provision for seeds, etc., would have been made available. And this time, a timely advice has come for the farmers not to sow their crops too early, because what happens is then the rains do not come and there is no germination of seeds. So I think if the farmers are given alternatives, and now more alternatives are available, especially fodder, etc., and pulses which require less water, leguminous crops which require less water. So I think this can be mitigated. However, there are areas where drinking water will have to be supplied. In 2015, it was taken by trains also in Maharashtra and also in Rajasthan. So these things may have to be repeated.
Okay, and viewers, do take note of the fact that the changes that we have seen overall in the Indian economy, the infrastructure that's available in the farm sector, for example, has also improved. But the shadow of the El Nino, and let's bring up those graphics to sort of drive home the point that our experts have made so far. Agriculture output getting impacted because of El Nino, lower crop yields being a very significant threat for farm income. And remember, this is also going to be is actually the pre-election year, that summer. Higher food prices and therefore inflation. We have seen the latest data which suggests that consumer inflation is on a downward trend. Growth is still holding on. There's also impact on the fisheries sector, coastal communities, and obviously increased disaster management costs. Before I go back to our experts and also to Mr. Hussain, I also want to bring up slightly older data, which tells us that it's not as if El Nino happens every now and then. There's been in the last 100 years 18 droughts that we have seen in India, and 13 of those viewers were caused by El Nino. From the 1900 to 1950, we saw 7 El Nino events. From 51 to 21, the next 50 years, we saw 15. So it practically doubled. And deficient rainfall, we have seen 9 times since 1951. This was just a bit of background data for the uninitiated, Mr. Hussain, and I am coming back to you. You made the point about timely advice. What more do you think should be done at this stage by the government, both at the center and the states level, as far as farmers are concerned?
See, I have a very simple suggestion for the government. If the assessment is that we may end up having a drought, then do not shy away from acknowledging that we may have a drought-like situation. So once it is accepted, this reality is accepted that we may end up having a drought, then I think a lot of preparatory work would become much easier. Many a times the problem is that the governments do not want to acknowledge that, and Sogato knows it very well. This is due to the possibility of an adverse impact on stocks and so on. If it is, the government has more information than anyone else, let me say that. IMD has a lot of expertise. They would be studying other models. Their models are very dynamic now. So the government should go by the scientific advice and accordingly issue directions to various IMD formations and state governments from time to time. Now, another good thing is that there are a lot of private companies which give advisories to farmers through SMS messages. So these advisories also help. Now, once these things are done, I'm sure that the impact of any adverse impact of drought can be mitigated to a great extent.
Okay, Shogato, you are back with us, and I don't know if you could hear Mr. Hussain, but the point he's making is that there are several advisories that are given to the farmers. There's a lot of data that's available with the IMD, but the broader point I want you to tell our viewers about is put this in context, the fear of an El Nino and its consequent impact in terms of the broader economic trajectory that we are witnessing and what could likely happen in the next 3 to 6 months from an inflation point of view and also therefore a growth point of view.
So again, sorry, I got disconnected. So one, in terms of growth, the 2 years that you're mentioning, 2015 and 2016, usually we, over the last 7 or 8 years, we have had a good run of growth in the agricultural sector. 4.7, 4.8% average during the year. But those 2 years, agricultural growth slowed down in 2015, I believe, to minus 0.2, and in 2016 to 2.0. Normally, it has grown at an average of 4.7, so you can understand. So it will have an impact on overall GDP growth. Agriculture is about 15% of GDP. If we assume that we lose 50% of that growth, 4%, 5%. Last year we had grown at 4%. We are now penciling in 5%. So if we lose half of that growth, so that definitely has an impact of 20, 30, 40 basis points on overall GDP, number one. Secondly, and past correlations also tell us that although there is a weak correlation between bad rains and bad agricultural production output and actual agri-food inflation, it is likely that food inflation is likely to rise. Fortunately for us, global food prices, the FAO index and other food prices seem to suggest that food inflation globally is under control. So food inflation is not going, global food inflation is not going to be a major knock-on problem for India. So that gives it a little bit of a buffer. Thirdly, stocks in India, food stocks, rice stocks, even now wheat stocks are relative to the actual level are high. So that also is likely to provide a degree of comfort for the government to be able to manage food grain inflation to a certain extent. On inflation, it definitely will have an issue. So we are already seeing that cereal prices are up in the last inflation prints, last 2 or 3 inflation prints. That cereals inflation is relatively high and rising. So that is likely to have an impact if there is a further drop in cereals output. But overall, I don't think so. There will be an impact on inflation. So the average inflation, assuming a normal monsoon this year, we had factored in about a 4.8% average CPI inflation. That is likely to cross 5, maybe 5.2% again. So that will be the effect on inflation, and which is not good because I mean rising inflation does indeed, as we have seen in the rural demand, and curbing demand means a loss of output. So that actually adds to the loss of GDP growth momentum. But overall, I think there are sufficient tools, sufficient stocks, and sufficient strategies that the government, both the center and the respective state governments, they can deploy to manage some of the risks on output and inflation in the system.
Okay. Mr. Hussain, I'm coming to you, and from a current food stocks perspective, how well are we placed? Last year we saw a dip in wheat, for example. The wheat procurement is already underway. The center has also announced its price policy just very recently. How is the picture looking like?
As far as the government's requirement of public distribution system and welfare schemes is concerned, the government is well placed. There is no cause for concern, and government will be able to meet the requirement of both public distribution system and midday meal, etc., other welfare schemes from its own stocks. However, I do not think the government's estimate of wheat production, 112, 113 million tons, is accurate. I think uh, it may well be 5 to 6 million tons less than that. And there are already indications of that in the form of imposition of stock limits on wheat. There is no reason why stock limits should have come so early in the season. In fact, this is almost just after the peak arrival season of wheat. And now the government has not only imposed these stock limits under Essential Commodities Act, the government has also decided to issue wheat under open market sale scheme to cool down the prices. So I think the government also knows that wheat situation, as far as the stocks, overall stocks are concerned, may need reduction in import duty. Right now it is 40%. So going forward, my own sense is that import duty may be reduced. And secondly, the government would be keeping its fingers crossed about the rice production and therefore rice procurement. So for this year, the government is well placed to meet the requirement of PDS welfare schemes. However, the government would be cautious about rice production and going forward in the next Rabi, because if the monsoon is too deficient, then the moisture levels at the beginning of Rabi are also low, and that also has an impact on the Rabi crop, that is wheat crop.
Absolutely, and all of this will have to be tracked very closely, considering, and I repeat myself here, that this is pre-election year and therefore some of the ripple consequences could be felt yet. Shogoto, as we wind down today's conversation, I just want you to also comment about the data that we saw that was released along with consumer inflation data, which is the IIP data, and where we saw a rebound in manufacturing in April, and it's risen from a 5-month low. And along with the factory output, we have seen other high frequency numbers also say that the economic momentum seems to be sustaining. What's your own reading of all of this?
No, I think you've said it so precisely. So the one of the large parts of we were surprised at the very high numbers. I mean, so that's one part that was really surprising. A lot of it actually came in from consumer non-durables, which is what we know as FMCG. So remember, this was the key concern in the commentaries of companies in the Q4 results, general conversation, anecdotal, casual empiricism, etc. That rural demand remains weak. The sales of consumer durables, two-wheelers, other vehicles, etc. in the rural areas remains weak. Even in the urban areas, the lower income families demand remains weak. That seemed to be countered by the April results that we saw. Very strong numbers, growth for consumer non-durables. Together with this, we also had fairly strong growth numbers from capital goods as well as the basic industries. So which is understandable given the government initiatives, the continuing push for infrastructure building, etc. And we have seen that in cement and steel output numbers. Together with this, with all the other numbers, the PMIs, the manufacturing PMIs, the tax collections, the petrol, diesel consumption, etc., still seem to suggest freight loadings, etc., seems to suggest that economic activity, manufacturing and the manufacturing side, services we all know still remain strong. So from the economic side, from the manufacturing side, the only thing that we now need to worry about from the manufacturing angle, not just the agricultural sector, is manufactured its goods, merchandise, exports. Because many of the economies which are large importers of Indian project goods, engineering goods, capital goods, etc., the US, Europe in particular, they are likely to slow down even further. Although, I mean, nowhere close to where earlier fears of a major recession, etc. So that remains a worry. But overall, together with this, overall consumer demand, and remember the commentaries of some of the FMCG companies and the consumer-facing companies suggests a degree of optimism in this quarter and the next quarters of a demand revival. That's where this agricultural, if there is a disruption in agricultural output, that is likely to play a major role.
Absolutely. The proverbial dark clouds of the monsoon on that sense of optimism that you have described, Sogato. One very final point with you, Mr. Hussain, from a policymaker's perspective. Last 3 years, constant challenges, a new surprise coming up. It was COVID, then it was the recovery and how we saw divergence in the economic recovery, then Ukraine, and who knew people were looking up the internet to find out what is this country that supplies over $1 billion worth of sunflower seeds to India, things that were not perhaps in the mass domain. Your own sense that could a deficient monsoon play spoil sport with that sense of optimism that we are seeing in several sections of the economy?
I do not think so. I think we have the wherewithal to tackle even a bad monsoon. Of course, how bad, we do not know how bad it is going to be. But supposing it is 3 or 4% shortfall in rains, I think we would be able to handle that. Even in a year of normal monsoon, for example, last year, the monsoon was 107% of long period average. But as I wrote in my article in Deccan Herald, the production of sugarcane has been revised downward 4 times in the last 1 year because of lower production in Maharashtra and Karnataka. So it is not that every year, even in year of normal monsoon, things are absolutely fine in all the states. No, monsoons are always erratic in some place or the other. So I do not think it will have a very bad impact on economy. We have the wherewithal, we have the experience of tackling bad monsoon, and I'm sure that my colleagues in the agriculture ministry and food ministry as well as in the state governments will be able to take care of the farmers. You see, the worst impact of El Nino and erratic weather is borne by the farmers, because they are the ones who lose their crop. Sometimes the first crop does not germinate, then they have to plant it again, so they have taken loan for the first crop, so they are the worst off. And what I want is that the crop insurance scheme and other government interventions will take care of the farmers.
Absolutely, taking care of the farmer, taking care of the annadata is very, very important. Thank you very much, Mr. Hussain and Shaukat Bhattacharya, for your time with us today and for sharing all those details. Viewers, we'll come back on this subject. This is not something that's just a one-off, and hopefully we will touch base again with both of them in 4 weeks from now, by when it will be clear what kind of impact El Nino has actually had as far as India's monsoons are concerned. Thank you very much for tuning in. With that, it's a wrap on today's episode. I'll see you again. Until then, goodbye.
Hello and welcome to the Business Today show. I'm Udayan Mukherjee.